So I'm filming this a few weeks before fall starts, and we're coming into the season of where we may see more and more cases of hypothermia. So I wanted to share with you today how to tell the difference between someone that is simply cold stressed and someone who is experiencing mild hypothermia. And so we're going to be referencing my book, Wilderness First Aid Made Easy, which is available on Amazon in printed and Kindle edition. And we'll be looking at page 23 of my book. And so we start out with, do you suspect hypothermia? Is the patient presenting normal mental status? And normal mental status is going to be a patient that is A plus O times 3. So they're alert and they're oriented times 3. They know their name, they know the place, and they know the time. And we answer yes to that. And the next question is the patient shivering? And if the patient is shivering, we ask another question. Is the patient functioning normally and able to care for themselves? And so the signs that we're going to be looking for is a patient who can care for themselves. You can tell them, go sit down, I'm going to wrap this blanket around you, and you stay right there. And if that patient will follow your commands, then you have a patient who can care for themselves. But if this patient you find stands up and starts walking around or knocks the blanket off, or maybe you have a patient who is mumbling and just not exercising good judgment, just not acting like their normal selves. They're A plus O times 3, but they're just not acting quite right. Well, that's a patient who's not able to care for themselves. So let's say that we have a patient who can care for themselves. They're not mumbling. They'll do exactly as you say. Then this patient is simply cold stress. They're not hypothermic. And so what we're going to do is we are going to reduce the heat loss. We're going to put the patient into dry clothing. If they have wet clothing on, we're going to get the wet clothing off and put dry clothing on them. And the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to provide our patient with a high-calorie food or drink. And my favorite is Jell-O. I'll take real Jell-O. This is Jell-O that's got real sugar in it. And I'll heat up 8 ounces of water, and then I'll pour the Jell-O into the water. I'll stir it up and I'll hand it to my patient. Number one, it's hot. It's a hot drink. Number two, it is full of sugar. It's high calorie. And for the person that is simply cold stress, they're not hypothermic. This is a person that we can increase heat production by getting them up, exercising them, and walking them around. But let's say that we have a patient who isn't able to care for themselves. They're not acting like their normal selves. They're A plus O times 3, but they're just not acting quite right. Then this is a patient that is showing the signs and symptoms of mild hypothermia. And the way that we want to treat them is the same way that we treat cold stress, is by reducing that heat loss. If there's any wet clothing on them, remove the wet clothing, get them into dry clothing. And you may even consider wrapping them in a vapor barrier. Wrap a tarp around them or something that will break the wind, or you may even want to put them into a hypothermic wrap, which you can find on page 23A of Wilderness First Aid Made Easy, and get them all wrapped up. Once again, we want to provide this patient with a high calorie drink. So hey, that hot water with the Jell-O in it is an excellent source of food and also heat. But this patient, because they're not able to care for themselves, we don't want them to walk or stand or anything like that. We simply want to wrap them up. We want to even consider active warming. And so if we have some warm water bottles that we can put under their armpits or against their neck, then that will help warm them up. And then we want to watch that patient. If we don't see any improvement in the next 30 minutes, then we're going to want to consider evacuating them immediately to get them to medical care. Students who attend my courses know that I teach prevention. I spend time on identifying the early signs and symptoms, the early presentations of illnesses, so that we can start treating those illnesses before they become bigger problems. And so this is really important, to be able to tell when a patient is simply cold stress. Anytime that we see shivering of any type, that's a time to stop. That's a time to start warming that patient up. And using the algorithms in Wilderness First Aid Made Easy will be able to help you troubleshoot those illnesses and treat your patients effectively.